Welcome to Shameless Leadership. I'm your host, Sarah Dean. This show is for women leaders who are committed to advancing both their own leadership and the leadership of those around them. In each episode, I offer practical strategies and inspiring stories to help you become a more confident, compassionate, and curious leader. The truth is, you were born to lead. So let's start now, together. Hello, Shameless Leaders. Today, we're going to be talking about the difference between armored leadership and daring leadership. And I will confess that this comes from Brené Brown's most recent book called Strong Ground. And that's not my confession. My confession is that literally within 36 hours of graduating from my master's program, I was listening to this book on audio driving home from Spokane to Seattle because I couldn't help myself in like my strong need to just keep learning, even though I had just finished my master's program and been in this like major 4-month long adrenaline rush to finish my capstone. And this book had been sitting in my audiobook account for a while. I was excited to get into it. And I thought, I'll just start now on this road trip driving home across the state of Washington. And I was embarrassed by myself with how excited I was listening to this book, how many golden nuggets there were. And there was this one piece where Brené Brown talked about the difference between armored leadership and daring leadership, where I found myself continuing to hit the little clip button on my audio book app, which allows you to kind of mark where you want to go back and listen to things again or add notes into things so that you can reference them again. And I found myself in this particular section just like, oh my gosh, I need to go back to that and back to that. I need to integrate this into all these different things. And so I wanted to share this piece with you because I think it's really, really useful. I think it's really eye-opening. And I think it allows us to look at ourselves in a little bit of a different way through a different lens, and hopefully allows us to see how letting our armor down can make us better leaders. I also think that armored leadership is one of those things that sometimes we do without realizing that's what we're doing. And it really keeps us getting in our own way and harming ourselves, sometimes more than others could harm us. And so I'm hoping that by calling some of this to your attention, you'll see maybe some things in here where you're like, oh, shoot, like I do that sometimes. And you can realize how maybe you're keeping yourself stuck in a certain way, or maybe not coming across in a way that really upholds the values you want to be upholding in your leadership. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what these two categories are. So in Brené's book, Strong Ground, she talks about armored leadership in the sense that you are leading from a place of self-protection. And then she talks about daring leadership in which you are leading from a place of grounded confidence. And we, as I'm describing these different components, I think we'll all be able to see areas and aspects where you think of leaders that you've had, past or present, and you're like, oh yeah, that was armored leadership. Or, oh my gosh, yeah, that is daring leadership. And I can think of examples of people in my life, leaders who I've had the opportunity to work with who have been able to do that. So notice where you can think of those examples. And then of course, notice where this is relevant to you, where you find yourself in one column or the other. Brené talks about 11 different aspects of armored leadership versus daring leadership. So I'm just going to go through them 1 through 11 in order, although I don't think the order particularly matters. I'll give some examples as we go. And then I'm also going to talk about at the end, what are the causes of armored leadership? Because if you're finding that, oh my gosh, I find myself in this position or this place of armored leadership more often than I would like to admit, let's unpack a little bit about why that might be in a way that doesn't send you into a shame spiral, because my goal is not for you to walk away from this episode thinking, oh, wow, I've been doing it all wrong, or, oh my gosh, I'm horrible at this. My goal is for you to be able to understand a little bit about why you might be armored in your leadership at times in ways that totally make sense. And then also, how would you benefit from letting that armor down and stepping more into that daring leadership? So with that, let's start with the first category here. So the first category is in armored leadership, you leading from a place of self-protection again. It is important to you to be a knower and to be right. So when we are armored, we want to be seen as someone who knows all the things and has the right answers, and being right is really important. When we are in daring leadership, again, leading with grounded confidence, we are invested in being a learner and getting it right. being right and getting it right can be two different things, because sometimes in order to get it right, we have to admit that we are wrong or that we were wrong about something. So there's a lot of humility in being a learner and getting it right, right? So the difference there being, how can I recognize where I'm digging my heels in just for the purpose of being right versus, oh, maybe there's space here for something else. Maybe there's a way to get this right that doesn't center me needing to be right. The second aspect here is armored leaders tap out of hard conversations. Daring leaders lean into vulnerability and skill up for hard conversations. So armored leaders are really avoidant of hard conversations. And look, I get it. Like, none of us are excited about a hard conversation, right? So an armored leader is like, yep, I'm out. Whether you are tapping out in an aggressive way, in a really quiet, subdued way, but you're tapping out. That daring leader leans into vulnerability, takes responsibility for developing skills to step into hard conversations. And so it's not just an openness to hard conversations, but it's really also developing, practicing, accessing skills for hard conversations. And that is a learned skill set for sure that is really, really required of strong leaders and of daring leaders. So notice for yourself, where do you tap out of hard conversations? And I can think for myself, especially, growing up in a household where everyone was conflict averse. Hard conversations are really scary, especially if this wasn't modeled to us, if we don't have a lot of skills around it. So not necessarily your fault if you don't love hard conversations, and recognizing, okay, if that's my propensity, then what do I need to do to flip into that daring leadership and to develop those skills in a way that can then benefit me and the people I'm leading. Our third aspect here is that armored leaders use shame and blame to manage themselves and others, and daring leaders lead themselves and others from a place of empathy, accountability, and learning. So what this means is that armored leaders weaponize shame and blame. And I think what's interesting here is that it's not just weaponizing shame and blame toward others, but it's also toward ourselves. When we tend to weaponize shame and blame toward others, in many instances, it's because we are equally as cruel to ourselves internally. And I think this can be kind of an interesting thing to consider. If you can think of someone who really seems to enjoy shaming other people, they probably do that to themselves. It's probably not just a one-way track there. And so daring leaders lead themselves and others from a place of empathy, accountability, and learning. So daring leaders, not only do they not weaponize shame and blame and point fingers, they learn from others, they listen to others, they consider other people's perspectives, but they also have self-compassion. They also are able to look inward and recognize, where am I hurting right here? Where am I being too hard on myself? Where am I maybe not giving myself permission to, learn a new lesson or see something through a different lens? So it's not just blaming and shaming others and then needing to learn how to use different skills toward others. It's really also toward ourselves. When we can be more self-compassionate, we can be more compassionate toward others. Next, we have that that armored leaders foster a sense of a scarcity-driven culture that is centered around there's not enough, where daring leaders commit to and model we are enough and we have enough. So armored leadership is fostering scarcity, that there's never enough of this, there's never not enough of that, there's never enough time, there's never enough resources. Maybe you were raised in a household like this. I for sure was. And daring leaders commit to and model that we are enough, we have enough, that we always figure things out, that we can get scrappy and resourceful, and we are highly creative, and we are motivated, and when we work together, like, we are unstoppable. Daring leaders are able to commit and model that there is the sense of enoughness and a growth mindset, that we don't need to sit in scarcity, which can be, pretty crippling at times. So think through, where does scarcity maybe get the best of you in leadership, and how does that come out, and where do you need to commit to and model enoughness? Next is values. So armored leaders profess values, probably have them on a poster on a wall somewhere. Daring leaders practice values. So when you think about values, whether you have them shared somewhere, whether you talk about them in a certain way, how are you really clearly demonstrating these values? How are your values breathing practices, not just words on a wall. This is really, really hard on an organizational level, and it is often a massive miss in organizational settings. So how are you living those values? How do you tell people that you live your values and then actually do that? And how are you pointing that out? As you are in leadership, in active moments of leadership, how are you saying, as a leader who values this, this is the decision that we're making right now. As a leader who values this, this is what we're going to do. So how are you being really clear and transparent around that? Next, we have armored leadership driving a fitting in culture versus daring leadership cultivating a belonging culture. So in armored leadership, we're driving this idea of fitting in. And whenever there is this idea or notion that people have to fit in, it means that there's an in culture and an out culture. It means that there are some people fit in and some people don't. A belonging culture makes space for everyone and says all are welcome in spite of your differences. And in fact, your differences are part of what make this dynamic and this group as special as it is. And so we want those differences to be shining and on display. So think through where there might be a fitting in culture versus a belonging culture. Things that you see in a fitting in culture are gossip, social groups, in groups, out groups, groups that have exclusivity as part of their conditioning. So noticing, are there dynamics at play where you're contributing to a fitting in culture versus building that belonging culture versus building that like, hey, I'm wrapping my arms around everyone. We all get to go together. Next, we have armored leadership looking to lead for compliance and control, whereas daring leadership looks to lead for commitment and shared purpose. Armored leadership thrives in power and control. We want people to fall in line. We want them to follow our orders and do things our way. And we want to be able to control things. And we want people we want to see a high level of compliance. We want people checking the boxes that we've set for them. Leading for commitment and shared purpose is not about controlling people and not about setting the rules that everyone else checks the boxes for, but instead it's identifying, where are we going together? What is it? How do we all get to contribute to this? How do we co-create this experience? How are we all able to participate and be engaged in ways that are meaningful to us? How do we all get to commit and be committed in ways that, have where there's shared purpose, where we have a sense of belonging, where there is, each of us has a place where our work feels meaningful and valued. Next, armored leadership looks like leading reactively. Daring leadership looks like leading proactively and strategically. In armored leadership, we see a lot of defensiveness, reacting to things immediately rather than being able to pause and say, hey, I need a minute to think about this. Hey, it's important that I get this right. Hey, I think I have a few questions. Hey, I want to think this through. Hey, it's important that I have all the information before I make a decision. So armored leadership acts real quickly with not all the information in many cases, and then has to clean up messes or leaves messes in their wake. And daring leadership leads proactively and strategically. Daring leaders are not afraid to say, hey, I don't know the best answer right now, so I'm going to take a minute. So again, this requires that humility. It requires that confidence, again, grounded confidence to say, I'm not responding just yet. I'm not ready to respond. And it would be irresponsible of me to respond before I'm ready or before I can make a thoughtful, strategic, intentional choice here. Armored leadership resists change. Daring leadership accepts and embraces change, including productive urgency, strategic risk-taking, and agility. I've talked before about my self-talk around change and I'm not a person who likes change, and I'm not good with change, and I hate change, and I just want everything to stay the same. I want things to be certain and predictable. And that's armored leadership. That's self-protection, right? Daring leadership is really about embracing that change is constant. That's that is a universal truth. And so if change is constant, then how am I going to be the best leader I can be in a world and workplace where everything is constantly changing? How am I going to make sure that I'm taking strategic risks to make sure that we're growing in the ways we need to grow, that I'm setting other people up to be successful? How am I embracing agility and being nimble and trusting that that's part of my superpower as a leader, is modeling that? And how am I then bringing other people with me who might be more change resistant, who might be more change averse, and helping them see where we all can grow together and how this can benefit everyone. Next, we have armored leadership getting stuck in and owned by failures, setbacks, and disappointments. In this one, you can imagine an armored leader like holding a grudge about like not winning a football game in high school, or like not winning whatever, like the final tennis match of their senior year. And then we have daring leadership, where you are owning your failures and setbacks and disappointments through open discussion, learning from them, and embedding the learning into your work in your teams. And so armored leadership is like getting stuck on this didn't go right, and now I'm mad at this person and that person, and I can't believe this, and like just stuck in the junk of it, rather than, okay, that didn't go as planned. So what do we need to learn from this? Like, where's the data? What can we do? How can we acknowledge the disappointment? Like, we don't need to blow past that. We can acknowledge like, oh, this was frustrating. We spent a lot of time here. We spent a lot of energy. And then how do we embed learning, what we've learned, into wherever we're going next? So this isn't about like holding a grudge. It's not about keeping score. It's not about staying stuck in whatever didn't work, but it's really about that momentum of failure and leveraging the momentum of failure as a leadership strength, rather than getting stuck in it because our ego is so big we don't know how to move through that. And then lastly, in armored leadership, we perceive leadership as being served by others, and in daring leadership, we understand leadership as serving others. When we have our armor up in our leadership, and we assume that because we're in a certain role, rank, position, have a certain title, that others therefore need to be serving us, we are automatically going to deflect and lose a lot of great people. There's a lack of magneticism that comes with being the leader who expects to be served by others. When we understand that leadership is a form of service, and that we see leadership as serving others, because as we've talked about in my Shameless Leadership Ascent, as you're rising in leadership, when your goal is to get to the top and be sitting at a table surrounded by other amazing people that you've brought with you, then leadership becomes an act of service, right? If I'm thinking that leadership is only about others serving me, then I'm going to get to the top and be by myself. And not only have I not won, because that's a real lonely road, but I also have not created space for other people to win alongside me. We can think of leaders who lead in a way that they expect that they should be served by others. We can think of politicians who act this way. We can think of people who thrive on and desire those hierarchical settings and environments, and only feel safe and protected when they have a certain title or a certain level of innate power because of their role, rank, or title over other people. That is a massive form of insecurity and form of self-protection, in which we think that we're creating protection for ourselves, and we're really telling ourselves a big, huge lie. So, as I said, when you look at these forms of armored leadership versus daring leadership, and you maybe have some uncomfortable moments of, oh gosh, I think I see myself in some of the armored leadership column, rather than sinking into shame, blame, and oh my gosh, like where do I go from here? Instead, let's look at what might cause armored leadership, and how do we want to unpack that in order to then step into and find that humility and grace to step into daring leadership in a way that allows us to be open to learning, in a way that allows us to acknowledge like, oh, I have some growing that I wasn't aware of that might be really helpful, not just to me, but to the people around me. So reasons you might default to armored leadership might be your social conditioning. It might be that this is what you were raised, this is, how you were raised, this is what you've been conditioned to do. If you've been conditioned to think that, if you've been conditioned to think that only so many women can get to the top, and there's only so many spots for women at the top, which is a very real thing in many environments, you might really embrace armored leadership because that self-protection drives, like, if there's only room for 1 or 2 or 3 of us at this table, how do I make sure that's me after all the work that I've done? So there can be social conditioning around gender roles and around what that might look like. That can be like there can be some realities in there that are very real. So thinking through, what is your social conditioning that might lead to armor leadership? Thinking through modeling from other leaders. I can think of a handful of examples of ways that I've led in the past, in instances, much to my own detriment, where I have followed modeling from other people, thinking that now that I'm at this level in whatever position I'm in, that this is how I should treat people, or this is how I should set boundaries, or this is how I should expect people to treat me. And it is always backfired. And it's often come from people saying to me or modeling to me, like, well, now that you're doing this, like, you need to set boundaries, or you need to show them who's boss, or you need to train people how to treat you. That's another big one. Train people how to treat you. And when people model leadership in that way, it immediately for me, it makes me step out of my own values and makes me instead elevate someone else's model of leadership that is sometimes in direct conflict to my own values. And I can think of some really specific instances where I led in certain ways because I thought this was what a leader in this capacity or in this role or at this level should do. And it was in direct conflict to me upholding values around curiosity or compassion or integrity. And this hasn't happened a lot, but the few handful of times that it has happened, and I can probably think of like 3 times in 15 years, but in each of those 3 times afterwards, I felt awful. I was like, that was horrible. I hated that version of myself. That didn't feel like me, but it also was so disorienting, because I thought, well, this is what you're supposed to do when you get to this level. This is how you're supposed to uphold a boundary. This is how you're supposed to, like, show them who's boss. This is how you're supposed to show that, like, you have the authority here. And for me, the value of authority is not a value in my leadership. Having authority in terms of being able to command a room and call people in, yes, but having authority in order to be able to control people or have power over people, no, absolutely not. That's not in my value system. So being able to deconstruct, what have other people modeled to you that you have maybe just kind of taken on without thinking it through, and realizing how it might be in direct conflict to your own values, can be really, really critical in making that shift from armored leadership into daring leadership. You also might want to think about past relationships and past trauma, big T trauma, little t trauma. Where might you have some armor up? And maybe out of a very legitimate need for safety and security. And where does that get in your way? And then what do you need to ask of yourself in order to let your armor down a little bit, not to make yourself completely vulnerable or to make yourself unsafe or put yourself in a place where you don't have any security, but in order to put yourself in a place where you can get what you want to get, and you can bring the people along that you want to bring along, and you can uphold your values in a way that you want to uphold your values. And so sometimes that means, doing some learning about yourself, deconstructing some things from your childhood, in unpacking some relationship struggles that you've had in the past, especially if there was trauma involved. And sometimes it's recognizing where some of these pieces of you're holding on to them so tightly that you're getting in your own way. And maybe you even need some extra outside support, whether that's through coaching, whether that's through therapy, whether that's through, talking to your best friend on a regular basis, but whether that's through, like, processing some of this stuff in order to be able to let your guard down enough to be able to be in that place of daring leadership. Again, not necessarily to expose yourself to high risk and, insecurity, but in order to be able to be the leader that you want to be. I hope this was helpful. I hope this helped you see yourself in a way that opened your eyes to some new behaviors that you want to start embracing, and also think through, maybe, oh, here's some things I've been doing by default that maybe don't serve me and maybe don't serve the people around me. No judgment, but let's go ahead and make some changes. Thanks for being here today. Thank you for listening in, sharing this episode. I can't wait to be back with you next week. And until then, know that I am in this with you always. Thank you for allowing me to spend time in your ear today. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe to this channel. To learn more about my speaking, training, and coaching services, visit saradean.com. That's SARADEAN. I would also love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn at saradean.com/LinkedIn or on Instagram at saradeanspeaks. I love hearing from my listeners. Thank you for showing up for yourself today. I see you, I hear you, and I'm holding space for you today and every single day.